Hey everybody, this is Perch. Well, I'm recording this on the day that the DC has officially come out, that John Kent has come out, and I clearly, I'm the guy who brings a lot of sarcasm that pisses people off, and I cannot believe it was just too early in the morning. I missed the obvious joke of at least doing a couple minutes in the John Kent is by story to actually, misrepresent it as that comic is starting to ship bi-weekly, which just like the jokes were writing themselves. How in the world did I miss that? But anyway, that would have just annoyed people. The more people, by the way, put in the comments like this is annoying when you do this, but you're just urging me to do more. I'm just you do have to understand I'm a troll in these things. But anyway, um, so all right, here's a question that I think that I got, almost immediately after this news was announced, and it's a legitimate question. I think it's one that bears some thought. It's also one that people have an incredibly hard time asking and dealing with, and it's because rather than kind of deal with the immediate question, it starts getting into all the side aspects to it, and that's this: comic books, and I think this is a legitimate fact. In fact, in many ways, if you go back and you look at interviews in the 90s with people like Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, other kind of big names at the time, one of the things that people were proud of who worked in comics was that it did include more representation, that you did have gay characters, you did have a number of queer characters represented, you did have these storylines, and you did have these moments. Now, granted, you did not have these moments in like Rob Liefeld's Youngblood, but even there, even in the Extreme Universe, you did have queer representation in that world. But comics has had this history for quite a long time. Chris Claremont was tackling racism long before mainstream TV and other mediums were doing it. This is not a debatable fact; it is a fact, and I think for a lot of people today who like to kind of portray the previous world of comics as being, unrepresentative of people, go back and look at some of your heroes. The most maddening thing, by the way, is all. Neil Gaiman disappointed me utterly by making some kind of tweet or statement like, comic books have not had this in the past. It's like, dude, you said comic books had this in the past. You said in a previous interview how proud you were that you worked in comics and comics had more representation going on than movies and TV and other mediums. So what is going on? Why the memory hole? That's the stuff that drives me absolutely insane. But this is true. So the question mark becomes, and the question that I got in mail is, why doesn't DC, for example, in this case, but you could substitute this for Marvel or anyone, why don't they do more with the characters that they created, years and years and years ago? Why don't they actually, Obsidian is the one that's coming up a lot today. Why don't you do more with that character? Character has been out as queer for a long time. I mean, a long, long time. And why don't you do more with that character? Why don't you elevate him? Why don't you find a way to put that character on the Justice League? I mentioned this, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years ago, and somebody goes, "Oh, well, you couldn't put a character like that on the Justice League because they don't have the profile." Well, we've got Naomi on the Justice League right now from Bendis. We've got Hippolyta on the Justice League. I think Obsidian, it certainly has as big a profile as as those two characters, and many, many more years. Are you telling me with all the things that comic writers can do, they can't figure out a way to put Obsidian on the Justice League? Like he's hanging out one day and the big crisis emerges and his power set just happens to save the day and he's super heroic and Superman's like, we need a guy like you on the team, and then there you go. This isn't rocket science. Be very easy to do. You can raise the profile of these characters, and I think if you're looking at this logically, you would want to do that because then that's more IP, that's more things you can license. It's another character you could potentially put in a cartoon or a movie or a TV show, or I mean, it's just more things to play with. At the end of the day, and I know the comic industry itself is super horny about the multiverse. If you start having lots of different Green Lanterns and Flashes and Supermans and Wonder Womans and everything running around, it is going to confuse people. In fact, it will. You could do multiversal storylines, but you can't do them every movie, and you can't like it. You can't just suddenly like here's 18 different Spider-Man to put on lunchboxes. You can't. It's not going to work well. You will see diminishing returns. So new characters, additional characters, are helpful. Um, but the question often becomes like, why is DC making an effort to replace legacy characters? In this case, you have here's the kind of intense comedy of all this is that you had a JLQ that was part of the round robin. He briefly had that short story show up in the DC Pride, and it was a number of characters that weren't well known. And a bunch of people I know were mocking that, but I was like, hey, I still think the idea of like you assemble all of the queer characters into one team seems kind of weird. I mean, I think if they're heroes, they just, maybe they're hanging out together, but this still seems very kind of unnatural that you wouldn't have an all straight team. I mean, you probably couldn't have that anyway at this point, but you couldn't. Why would you? Why would you? That's a very weird restriction to put in. It's very not natural to kind of the way the world works. That you'd suddenly like, well, we have the all black team here, all the women team here, all queer team here, all straight team here. Like why? Like I don't know. That's not how heroes think. But regardless, I find it kind of funny slash painful that you had this team and you did at least get some characters in there you were raising the profile of. And I think that was good. Like several of those characters in there, it's like, okay, let's see what we can do with them. But what's kind of replaced it now is that you have bisexual John Kent, you have bisexual Tim Drake, you have um, bisexual just queer or lesbian Joe Mullen. You have a Jess Chambers Flash who's pansexual or non-binary. I think non-binary is. You have Jackson Hyde Aquaman who's gay. You have at this point you don't need the those characters in JLQ. You've got legacy. You have bigger names now, and I feel that DC is going to be like, well, I'm not going to put the money into a book with Obsidian and some of these characters that are lesser known when I can just have the same thing with I can call this character Flash, Green Lantern, a Batman and a Superman and call it a day. I mean, and the news has been picking up more that you have Diana Wonder Woman is bisexual or somewhere along those lines. So it feels like you're taking money off the table because you have these characters that have existed for decades that you could do more with. But instead, it's like, hey, what would be better representation is if we took Superman and then we made Superman bisexual. And to be fair, because I've talked about this with people before, and I think that people start to get the impression it's like, well, you just don't want any kind of queer characters. No, not at all. I want you to do more with the ones you have. If you want to do these storylines, like and have Tim Drake explore sexuality and everything else, that's what you want to go down. I mean, again, they're your characters, go nuts, but don't forget the characters you already have. Because when I look at this, I always think it's I don't know, borderline disrespectful. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, to consistently introduce characters that are queer, then proceed to ignore them and write them off while you jump to the next big thing, and you do that. And it's like, if you really respected representation and these characters, I would think you'd want to stick with them. I would think that you'd want to make something out of it. I mean, is it really impossible to take a character like Obsidian and do something with that character? Power set's really cool, personality's cool, background's cool, even a bit of a rogues gallery you can tap into. I would think there's more storytelling potential and frankly more applause that you would get by taking this character that's been kind of underutilized in the past and making them a big character. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there would definitely be people who will show up to say you're pushing a gay agenda or whatever it happens to be if you start doing more with Obsidian. Absolutely. There's always going to be somebody who's going to criticize you. But, I mean, it feels like the better thing to do. It feels like the thing that's going to actually, feel more like actual representation and actual bringing up of a character as opposed to I don't think the audience. The problem is this all feels very cold and cynical, When you have characters like that that have some legacy, have some history, have some background, and are almost blank slate, you can do what you want with them, and you can build them up, as opposed to saying, "Hey, here's a shocking reveal. Superman's son has a boyfriend." It feels like you're going for cheap attention and cheap money rather than investing in your characters, rather than investing in your own IP that would arguably make your company a lot more money in the long term and still provide kind of representation to everything else. I mean, I guess the question mark is, if you were to write a great Obsidian series, put them into Justice League, try and say, over the next 2 years, we're going to really try and promote this character and do more with this character, for representation, but also just have a character out there. Would that sell so dramatically less than a John Kent Superman book where he's by? I'm not sure. I mean, again, put the same writer, same art talent. You can't say we're going to do an Obsidian book, then proceed to put kind of unknown people in there and half-ass the marketing and the art. You have to do the same amount of marketing, same amount of attention, same amount of interviews, same amount of creative talent, same spin, basically, that you're doing on this book. Would the return on investment be the same? I think it would be really close, because comics aren't selling the 200, 300, 400,000 copies that they once did on the newsstand. It's a much more specialized audience now. And we've seen, like, Bendis was on Superman, and that was selling in the 40s and 50s. The Tom Taylor Superman with John Kent had an initial bump, and of course it had the same, some variant covers and some other things. It's got a more high-profile art team and everything else. But it feels highly likely that book, whether John Kent was bisexual or not, whether they addressed it or not, it feels likely that book was probably going to settle into the 40s and 50s. I say that just from the history of what Superman's done at DC. So are you telling me that if you put a high-profile writer-artist team on a character like Obsidian and you rolled it out there, what would that do? 30 to 40,000? Okay, well, what if you did the same amount of marketing and PR on it? I think the thing is, I think you'd all wind up in about the same place. So wouldn't it make more sense to leverage your existing characters? Wouldn't it make more sense to be able to put out press releases saying, Obsidian's been a out queer character in the DC universe for a very long time, and it's time we gave this character the spotlight he deserved, and that's why we're doing this series, and it's a bold, new, exciting person that people can rally behind. Like, wouldn't that be good? I don't know. I think you'd want to do that. I would like to argue with somebody, because whenever we do these videos, there's somebody who comes in and goes, the people in the comments who don't like this are bigots. You see those kinds of people come in. But I would like to debate this, or not even debate, but just talk this through with somebody who is very happy about John Kent coming out and that whole thing. Somebody who's like, this is great. Because I just, what is it about it that's great? Is it about that you've got, you look on Twitter and they're like, we got another one, is kind of the tweet. But you have several. And sure, if you want more, fine, but shouldn't you do something with the ones you quote unquote have? Like, when people say, I don't think these people are actually reading comics, it's because of comments like this, because it doesn't feel like people are actually reading comics when you're saying things like, we got another one, because that has nothing to do with actual comics. It feels baffling to me, and I understand the kind of the culture war and everything else. The other kind of demeaning, I always the dumbass who comes in, it's like, you got to open up your eyes, Perch, because this is going on all over the place. Once you finally realize the ideological, okay, sorry, come on, people. I said, every time somebody comes in with something like that, it's like, you dumbass. Anyway, I don't think any of these people are reading comics, I guess is my point. And I think that Marvel and DC in particular have a very long legacy of characters. And they have some characters who a lot of writers put in some real work into to try and make them kind of well-rounded and with kind of deep personalities and everything else. And it feels wasteful, I guess is the best way to put it. It feels absolutely like you put this effort into developing this cool property, And then you went for the cheap gimmick to go, hey, Superman's gay. And it's even in Taylor's comments, it was you kind of frown reading them because it's like, well, what does it mean now when the most powerful superhero is gay? And it's like, or bisexual, I guess. What is it? How about that? Now we're really making a stand. Like it's then you just have to look at that and go, well, story doesn't matter, details don't matter, plot doesn't matter, character development doesn't matter. It's just, hey, this identity and Superman's strong. I mean, never mind the fact that just a couple months ago we saw, plenty of conversation about how superheroes were, the Superman wasn't the most powerful superhero because, of this or that. Or, I mean, we've seen less than a year ago lots of comments about how Wonder Woman was the most powerful superhero. And other, I mean, just, none of this means anything, is my point. But why not take advantage more of the characters you have that have a backstory? Why not? And I understand, I'm asking this question somewhat rhetorically. Of course, a lot of this has to do with getting the press release because they know IGN or whatever is not going to do a article that says Superman is bi. That, like, if it's Obsidian, they're not going to go, hey, breaking news, Obsidian is gay. Nobody is going to write that article. They're hoping to get USA Today or somebody else to kind of write that article, put that press out, and everybody gives them a round of applause and like, congratulations for representation. And then nobody buys the book. And then they're stuck in an awkward situation like a year from now where you've got this middle tier, not selling terribly well title. And it's like, well, then you have to do the save face. The story has come to a close for now, but there's always exciting adventures in the future that we'll be able to get to. And who knows, if fans really ask for it, we'll be able to do it again. But this is a cyclical, never goes anywhere. How many sales, how much actual value has DC Warner gotten out of a USA Today article? Any? Is any of this matter at all to sales for comics or sales for the license or everything else? Is there going to be a bunch of people that are going to jump on and dress up like John Kent for Halloween and drive some licensing sales for merchandise? Is that going to happen now? Are we going to get a John Kent's boyfriend action figure that's going to drive some sales? Is this going to lead to anything that actually drives business for anyone? Comics, licensing, anything. I mean, forget even the comics. Maybe this doesn't do a single thing for the comic, but it drives money for other things. Unlikely. All this getting the headlines, getting this press, it doesn't mean anything. It's like junk food. It doesn't actually move the needle at all. Whereas you have comic creators at DC and others that have invested real time into building up fully three-dimensional involved characters that you can do something with, that you can actually market and have more to sell. And those characters get forgotten in favor of the cheap pop. I don't know. This feels, in a wrestling perspective, it feels a lot like where you're building up old, Bret Hart to have a nice title run. And it's like, oh, it's not happening as fast as we'd like. And I don't know, it seems kind of tricky to do it. So let's bring in Hulk Hogan and give him the title. Let's just do that. It's Hulk Hogan will solve everything. Yeah, doesn't really work out that way. Doesn't really give you anything. And so it's I don't know. I like some of these legacy characters. I like the fact that comics had all kinds of different personalities, all kinds of different things going on with it to take advantage of. That's a cool part of comics. And to watch people consistently just kind of give that away, I mean, I don't know. What's the point? Anyway, let me know your thoughts below. Tell me where I'm wrong, obviously. And like I said, if you're really excited about this, I do want to hear from you. I do want to hear that side of it because to me, this seems like a very short-term game that doesn't get us anywhere. Anyone anywhere, including the people who are looking for representation. Doesn't feel like it gets anyone anything. Thanks for listening.